Hello and welcome to Speak Life. My name is Glen, Scrivener, and joining me today from just down the road is pastor, preacher, and author of many books, including God of All Things, Andrew Wilson. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
I am. Yeah, very much enjoying the idea of having a conversation with someone who lives 100 yards away from me.
Yeah, it's a bit strange, isn't it? Yeah, we should
We
be in
could
the same
shout.
room together. Yeah, we could. In fact, I went past your house in order to come to this recording, so it's very odd. So we both live in Eastbourne on the Sunshine Coast. More sunshine hours than anywhere else on mainland UK is the claim. But my Australian family thinks it's hilarious that Eastbourne is called the Sunshine Coast.
Yes, all things are relative.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. So you've just come out with a book called God of All Things. And can you just tell us in a nutshell, what is this book about? And then I'll ask you to dive into one of the chapters to give people a flavour of it. But God of All Things, what's that all about?
So the idea is that God didn't have to create a physical, material world, but he did, and that the reasons he did that are significant if we start with the things and work their way up to what they reveal about God. That what we effectively do is, if we look at the world the normal way, we think, oh, I can see out of my window, I can see grass, that could be an illustration of this sort of thing about God. And so we do what theologians have often called anthropomorphic theology. We look at human or created things and then project up to go, that's a good illustration of God. And the claim of the book is that actually that's the wrong way around. I mean, it's good, but it's not good enough. And what we need to do is really the reverse, which is to say that the world is full of things which have been created in order to reveal to us something of who God is and what he is like. And therefore the reason there are rocks is in large part because God wanted to give us a picture of what it was like to be steady and unchanging, and a place where you could go and run and hide, and a place that could be firm in the midst of the storm and that you could build your whole life on. And so he built these sort of granite things which are rock hard and so on, so that we might learn a little bit of what the steadfastness of God is like, and multiplied by many examples. And so this book does that 30 times over with 30 different things in creation. That's the idea.
So it's not as though God looks around at some ready-made gospel illustrations and says, "Oh, look, rocks. They're a little bit like me, I guess." But it's entirely the other way around. It's
as mischievous as you frame that. Yes, I think, and in some ways, you just have to be prepared to press into that a little bit and go, okay, so the person who said, "Consider the lilies," is the creator of lilies and knew that he was going to do that when he created it. You see the end from the beginning, and you think, okay, so there's something in the creation of the lily or the flower or the sparrow, and these just right out of the Sermon on the Mount. The greatest communicator in history, preaching the greatest sermon in history, is drawing out things from the world he's made, left, right, and centre, and saying, I hope that you will look at that thing and deduce something about what an anxiety-free life might look like, or what providence might look like, or whatever. And so I think it's an attempt to dig into that and say, well, okay, let's run with that proposal for a while and see to how many different objects it might apply.
Yeah, and the Sermon on the Mount is a great example of Jesus saying, look around at your Father's house, in which your Father takes care of lilies and birds and treats us like children in a household. That's very arresting for us in a kind of a post-Enlightenment Western mindset, and we tend to think of the universe as this factory floor that just grinds along, and the gears just kind of, according to its own kind of, under its own power, this closed system grinds along. And you're giving us a much richer understanding of what the world is really for, I guess.
Yeah, I think the idea is it's temple, not machine, or whatever other image you might want to use, isn't it? It's a place set up for the dwelling of God, and it's got, even depending on how far you follow it through, but it's got a sort of an upstairs and a ground floor and a basement. And I mean, there are a lot of things about the way the world is created, even three-decker universes, and the home language and temple language is so embedded into, particularly the very beginning and the very end of Scripture, that you'd say, this is my Father's house. And that's not just true of the church, although gloriously so, but also true of the world he's made. And it's full of things. And like an expert designer wouldn't trivially leave a little chintz or a pattern on a wallpaper without it having some meaning, I think there is, to some degree, an invitation for us to explore and say, okay, this world contains pigs. What's that about? Why? Or tardigrades, or like kind of very strange creatures that you think there's got to be a reason in there somewhere. And hopefully, without letting it run into complete speculative silliness, there's a an invitation for us to press into that a bit intellectually and doxologically, or in our worship, and say, the God who made that must be glorious in the following ways. And yeah, so that's what the book's an attempt to do.
Yes. Give us an example of that. I loved your chapter on tools. And tools I guess it's a good example of one of the things that you just zero in on, just way, way down, from 30,000 feet down we come to this very granular detail about, have you thought about tools? And have you thought about tools from a biblical perspective? Tell us, what do tools teach us about the world and about God?
Well, this comes from the book of Judges. So I was put onto this by James Jordan, whose commentary on the book of Judges I read it while I was writing this book in my devotions. I often read commentaries in devotional times, and I was just really amazed by it. He kept drawing out the point. Look at how many people in Judges are called to rescue Israel through the use of an ordinary household implement. And so you read this. So there's a character like Shamgar, who most of us wouldn't even know who he was. And when I'm asked to list the judges, there's a guy I know who sometimes does this quiz, and he's always one of the ones you forget. He's not the sort of Samson or Gideon or Deborah, so you just forget him. But it says something like Shamgar took up an ox goad and killed X many Philistines or Midianites. I don't even remember myself. And off he went. It's like, you think, why have we got a cattle prod being introduced as a means of delivering Israel? And then you find that somebody else is killed with a millstone, and somebody else is killed with a jawbone, and somebody else is killed. Of course, Gideon famously takes up little trumpets and lamps, and the whole book is, why? And then Jael, and in the story of Deborah fighting Deborah and Barak, you end up with Jael being killed with killing this guy with a tent peg through the skull. And you think, why on earth are all of these very ordinary pieces like camping equipment and farming tools? And the book of Judges seems over and over again to draw out this idea that Israel is being delivered through use of very ordinary domestic things you might have to hand. Like in our world, it might be a rolling pin or a food processor, but like very, very basic everyday things, rather than with these mighty swords. And so I make that point and try and get people to see it, and then stand back from it a bit and go, so what are we learning here? We're learning, I suppose the obvious point is that God does not save his people by their military strength, but by something miraculous to him. And the very foolishness of defeating the enemy with a millstone or a tent peg or a cattle prod is intended to make us realize, not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, or words to that effect. So that's the sort of easy bit. But then I think that there's perhaps an eschatological frame here as well, which is, no, tools are also promised as being a symbol of the new creation, that what happens is we hammer our swords back into plowshares and our spears back into pruning hooks, as if the purpose of iron ore, and I didn't even go there in the book, being in the ground, is that we might not primarily make weapons of war, but that we might make weapons of peace, of things which would literally tend vines and fields to make bread and wine or whatever. And that's the Isaiah vision, is a vision in which weapons have become tools. So I think there's an eschatological frame. And then I think there's even, and this is the bit where I push the envelope a bit, but I know that you're a fellow envelope pusher on these sorts of Christological issues. Is there even something there about the cross, about Christology, and the idea that the cross itself is a collision between the weapons of the world and the tools that Jesus literally grew up using in his own carpentry shed of wood and nails, and then it's actually his wood and his nails that end up confronting the weapons of Rome and destroying it. And of course, he ends up dying with, this is Jesus, King of the Jews, above his head. And of course the joke is on the people who put it there, because it's the most unlikely reversal that ever happens, and it's now a great sign of victory that many of us have in our churches or on our person or something. And so all of these things, to me, you stand back from that and you think there's a connection here, that God takes delight not just in using the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, but actually in turning that weapons of war into weapons of peace, and ultimately of expressing those things in the cross as well. So those are three things I do with it. There might be others, and in some ways I'm not even certain that all of them are as defensible as each other. But that's part of the point. It's an attempt to lean into it and say, I could pick up a power drill, or no, I wouldn't. I could pick up a hammer, let's say something much more basic that I'm more likely to wield, or a screwdriver or something. I think there is something God-given even about this thing that a human being has made, and I've purchased at a DIY shop or something. But there is something God-given about this kind of thing, which appears again and again in Scripture and is intended to draw my mind to something about him.
Right. And these are instruments of life, instruments intended to serve humanity, and somehow they triumph over weapons, which are instruments, designed to take life.
Yeah. So is that,
got
flourishing versus destruction?
Yes, yeah, and on either side of that Roman spear on Good Friday, you've got these two radically different visions of power. You've got, Roman power with the centurion thrusting it up into Christ, and then Jesus being on the receiving end of it, and yet who had the power in that situation? Through the eyes of the flesh, everyone would think it was Rome. Well, 2,000 years later, we think differently, don't we?
Yeah.
So how do you, and that was a brilliant and I think paradigmatic chapter, or at least it seemed to me to contain all the kinds of elements that are present throughout your book, Andrew. How are you reading Scripture in order to do such a biblical theology of tools? And have you always read the Bible like that?
No, not at all. In fact, last time I spoke to you on this show, probably about 2 years ago, I had just started. I think we spoke about, I can't remember actually, did we speak about the Exodus book or Spirit and Sacrament, or maybe both? I don't know.
Both, yeah.
And I actually think that was quite a significant, a door opened for me through my friendship with Alistair, with whom I wrote the book about Exodus. I think
Alistair Roberts, that is, yeah.
Yeah. And then through him, got into the work of Peter Lightheart, who I just found this sort of fount of interesting observations like the ones I've just mentioned. And some of them are directly from him and James Jordan, from whom he would say he got the idea. So this sort of like cascade effect, really. So some of it, I think, is specific instances, like the one on tools, where I really think I saw that being drawn out by another writer. And so I haven't necessarily learned to read the Bible that way on that chapter. I've just heard it from someone else. Like you get all your best ideas from other people. But I do think that by over doing that kind of thing multiple times, and particularly I spent quite a lot of, was it 2019 or 2018, in Lightheart's massive commentary on Revelation, which is like a deep dive, and there's a lot of stuff that's out there in it. But a lot of this sort of work happening, of trying to seeing a theology of things, which I think is where probably reading that book is where I got the idea for the book I've written now. But let's go into olives, and he just talks about what olives can mean, and often he does it so briefly and so sort of in such a flurry of imagery that you end up feeling like you've been splattered with a fire hose a bit, and I'm not quite sure what to do with that, but it's interesting. And I think what I then wanted to do was to sort of pan for gold really, and shake that around a bit and say that might be true, but I'm not sure it particularly gets me worshipfully very far, whereas that idea is critical. And so in a way, I think what's happened is, as I've now gone with that in mind, I now go back and read my Bible in normal times, and I'm just much, much more attuned. And I hope this book will help people become more attuned to the ways in which the scriptures make those connections. And I think the obvious reason for doing that is that so much of the Bible is actually about physical stuff, and physical stuff that we don't notice at all. And like hair, for instance, why on earth do you mean very, very physical stuff that we almost feel a bit odd talking about? And some of the obvious examples of animal sacrifice, and you think, oh yeah, I know, but that's a picture of Jesus. But what happens when you start getting into long chapters about what you do with with skin conditions or with mildew in your house, and realizing these things are not simply civil rules to try and stop people's houses go moldy or whatever. They are teaching Israel, this nascent nation, about the structure of the world that God has made and how to thrive in it, and in ways that, if we're going to make any theological sense of large swathes of the Old Testament, and the New for that matter, we're going to need to reckon with. And so I think you then start going through a passage like, we have this treasure in jars of clay, and you think, okay, jars, let's think about jars. Like, where in the Bible do we find a jar with a light shining from within it? You might go back to the Gideon story, and where do we find the idea of what is a jar meant to be, and what's it like? It might get broken over the feet of Jesus. It might be filled with light to light up a night. It might simply be a symbol of how sort of destructible and basic and boring something was. It's like a pot, like that we have 20 of them in my house and none of the lids match the pots. It's that sort of image. And what am I going to do with that when God says that's what you are like as a Christian, and the suffering and weakness you have will present the light of Christ through it as you manifest potness? And so it's basically using that habit of reading to then go back through scripture from beginning to end. And some of them, by the way, just end up in complete cul-de-sacs. You think, I still don't really know what that one's about. But a lot of them you think, there might be some gold in there.
Yes. I was doing some work on the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11 the other day, and just noticed, they said, come, let us make a tower, and with bricks for stones and tar for mortar. And And an interesting example. So bricks for stones led to a very rich kind of Bible study in terms of, okay, stones are like God glorified earth, whereas bricks are man manufactured earth. And we're trying to harden earth in two different ways. God glorifies earth with stones, and sometimes precious stones, and they come to, stand for the people of God.
That's
because
lovely.
Aaron's got the stones on his chest, and he goes, and then in the New Testament, obviously, we're living stones and that kind of thing. And you're like, okay, but the Babelites, they don't want that kind of community. They're all about baking the earth and firing it again. And you go to Exodus 5 and you see Egypt, and this is the powers of the flesh pounding on the flesh.
Bricks without straw.
Bricks without straw. And it leads to an incredibly rich kind of Bible study. And I loved kind of doing that. And then I tried to work out something for slime instead of mortar, or tar for mortar. Didn't get anywhere.
Well, that's exactly what I mean. Sometimes you go into it and you think, wow, there's loads in there. So when you first said bricks with stones, I thought, oh, where's he going to go with this? And you think, yeah, no, that's wonderful. And then other passages you go, yeah, I'm not really sure that I'm not sure this quite marries up. And I think that's part of the fun of it.
And I think, the challenge then is, well, I need to mature and I need to go deeper because my default assumption should be there's something rich here that maybe I'm not mature enough to understand it yet. And maybe my scriptural knowledge is not rich enough yet. But if we at least have the assumption that this scripture is far deeper than I had imagined it to be, we're not great at that. In the evangelical tribe, I feel like we go to the scriptures for a little kind of fortune cookie of wisdom, or there's probably only one big point that this chapter is trying to give to me, and we believe in scripture, but we don't perhaps have a sense of its richness or its depth. Is that analysis fair?
I think so. I mean, I'm not going to say speak for yourself. No, I suspect it is. I think it is. I think probably in a good way we have been trained. I mean, I think the reformers were quite eager to get us back to making sure that we didn't try and read everything without, where everything has to be an allegory for something else, because they had seen that abused probably and used it badly. And so as a result, we've pulled away from reading. We want to read the literal sense, as in the sense, I don't mean wooden literalism, but we want to see the literal sense of what this passage would have meant to its original. And I'm a big believer in that. When I teach hermeneutics, I say the primary meaning of any text is what this would have meant to its original readers or hearers. That's how you got to start. But there might be other stuff that as when you start there, you fan out, you might find there's all sorts of other things in there too. So I think there's a good instinct in it, which is attempting to protect us from speculative silliness gone mad. But I think I've become persuaded, even in the last 5 years, that can be much too narrow. Can mean we miss a lot of joy. And to be honest, there's a nice thing here about the pudding and eating, really, is that I think if in the book, in my book, and in many like it, I think you can be a little bit take it or leave it if you want. You can write about it. I can even preach and illustrate it. Say in the end, if you're not seeing what I'm seeing, I don't think that's the main thing that text is informing you about. Shamgar's ox goad or whatever. I don't think that really matters. I think it will enrich your understanding of this story. I think it'll actually help you make evangelistic and doxological sense of a passage that's otherwise quite odd and short, and what's that there for? But if it doesn't work for you, then I'm not going to particularly feel upset about that, because it's not a matter of core doctrine. And do you see what I mean? I think it enables a bit of freedom in a good way to allow the Spirit to speak to you through the text in that way. And if somebody comes away and goes, do you know what, I'm just not seeing it. Your bricks and stones thing, or my cattle prod thing, they're like, yeah, don't buy it. I say, well, okay, I think those doctrines are still taught elsewhere, even if they're not echoed here. And I think I probably did say this about the Exodus book, but the same is true here. Then an echo can't be proved. It's like a joke. You either get it or you don't, and if you don't, you can't really explain why it's there, and it has to be heard. And I suspect the same is true of these.
And I think even as to your point about what did the author intend by this text, I think we don't go deep enough on that. Like when the Apostle Paul speaks of jars of clay, he probably has a lot in mind when he says jars of clay. Here is a man absolutely steeped in the scriptures. And so probably the author is a lot more resonating with these larger scriptural themes than we are.
Yes.
Let's just assume that Paul is actually evoking quite a lot of his scriptural background. So on the level of that author, there are meanings that need to be mined. But on the level of God's authorship, the double authorship of the scriptures, that by the Spirit this is God's word as well. If God is writing a story, then he is in charge of the details. And just as you watch the Matrix film, and Neo is called Neo, and Trinity is called Trinity, and Morpheus is called Morpheus, and you're like, well, because there's an author behind this story, they're not just reporting on stuff that already existed. The author named those things in those ways. And so his level of authorship also would give us warrant to mine a little bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's something you and I have talked about before when it comes to hermeneutics. And seeing, I was interested in the parallels between this conversation and when we spoke previously on the Exodus, because in many ways the two books are doing similar things. One is trying to do it with a biblical narrative, and the other one is trying to do it with objects in Scripture. To me, the bit that becomes stickier is where I leave the biblical reservation altogether and say, this isn't an image that the Bible particularly uses to make it this pressing point. It might be because it's an animal that, an animal that in biblical times is either hardly even there, or I've done it before with penguins. I don't include penguins in this book because I've done it in something else, but where I think, okay, can I now do the same exercise without having any hermeneutical control exercised over me by the fact that it appears in this text, and therefore I'm answerable to everybody about what this text means? Might I now be able to stand back and consider what is true of species or created things, of which there are tens of millions around the world that people in Israel simply didn't know anything about? Right. And that's where things become more exploratory. And but again, I think the same principle holds, though. This is still created by God. It may or may not be in the Word, but it's created in the world as a means of witnessing to something.
Right. And Calvin's analogy of Scripture being like lenses, being like glasses that you put on, spectacles, and so that you don't just see the Word, you see through the Word to the world. And it brings that into focus. And if you can't see the gospel in a butterfly, I don't know how Christian you are.
It's a great example.
That's not in the Bible. Yeah. That's not in the Bible. The Bible doesn't say that caterpillars basically die and rise again and emerge from the tomb and kind of ascend.
But it couldn't be a clearer image, could it? Really?
Yeah. So that's Scripture and how we read it. But what about nature? And theologians often distinguish between natural revelation and special revelation. And special revelation of Scriptures, but creation itself reveals stuff. What does creation reveal, would you say?
Well, that's a very big question. So I think all of the things we've just talked about are good examples of not only the Word revealing things, but of creation itself revealing things. So I think I would start there and say that the Word explains to us how to read creation, like the lenses image you've just used. And I do think that's important to state up front, because I think I'm not a complete bottom-up foundationist. You could look at the world without revelation and deduce your way to the God who made it and everything about him. I think you can deduce the existence of a creator, and I think you can deduce that he must be, like Romans 1 says, that he must be invisible and very powerful. And there's lots of things you can infer, but there's an awful lot about the Christian message that you couldn't, and you need God to step in and speak and embody that truth himself rather than just declare. So I think that's kind of what there are limitations to nature outside of revelation. But all of that said, I think that given that you begin, as we've already said, the Bible is God, the world rather is God's temple and his house and his project to renew the whole of creation, and it's something that he sanctifies by entering into himself, and he's continually teaching us about it in his own person, but also throughout the Scriptures. I think that gives us permission then to say there are lots and lots of other things in this world that reveal to us other things that Jesus was not trying to communicate in. He may have been when he made the world, but he wasn't when he was speaking about them and teaching on them, and neither is anything else in Scripture. And some of these are things that the Bible, as I've just mentioned, Bible writers do nothing about, like a penguin. or a butterfly or whatever. But others are things which they did know about, but we have since learnt a lot more about, which enable us to get revelation that may not have been in the mind of the person who first pointed to them. Classic example, when I consider the heavens the work of your fingers, what's man, you're mindful of him. That kind of line, or all of the lines we have about the stars. I mean, this is Louis Giglio's entire preaching ministry was basically this, like, hey, space is huge, can you see God? And I think that kind of thing that's a very explicitly granted permission for us to see the scale of what God's done and just allow our minds to run away with the scale and grandeur of God. So I think there's that sort of idea. And then you could, of course, you do that at the micro level as well. And you start going into things which are far smaller. And I think our understanding of the intricacy of what he is before all things, and in him all things holds together, means with atomic or neutron microscopes, I mean, you're able to go so much smaller and so much larger than people were in the biblical times, that I think you're able to see, I don't want to say see a greater truth, but I certainly think you're able to see a very vivid illustration of a truth in greater detail, perhaps, than would have been open to someone who just didn't know what those things were or how they worked. And I think you can see, and you can probably extend that metaphor to all kinds of other things. I think when you understand photosynthesis, you start thinking, I'm just looking out of my window, and I mean, it's an industrial estate, so there's not a lot to go on, but there's still, even from here, things I can see that I know a lot more about than someone in the first century would have, and that can prompt in me layers of wonder and delight at what God has fashioned and why, that may well go beyond people who first mentioned them, even if the Bible writers were aware of those things.
Yeah, yeah. To go from the very large to the very small, it's interesting in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and then David sort of fixes on the sun, and God has pitched his tent for the sun, which is like a champion, like a bridegroom, rejoicing to run its course, and nothing is hidden from its heat. And what's interesting to me is in the second half of Psalm 19, obviously he says, but it's the law of the Lord that revives the soul or converts the soul, as the old translation sort of says. So again, we've got this idea of the scriptures bring you life, but with some very scriptural spectacles on. David is not just looking at the sun and saying, that is big and powerful. He's saying, that's like a champion bridegroom, light of the world. And its journey goes from east to west, which is kind of the journey of the high priest, isn't it? Every day, east to west, into the presence of God, as our champion, as our bridegroom, as the light of the world. So that, without those scriptural spectacles, you might simply get a picture of power. But with those scriptural spectacles, you get something quite gospel-shaped, quite specifically Jesus-y,
Yes.
if you like.
Yes.
Same with, seeds, to go to the very small thing. Jesus sort of picks on a seed in John 12, and he doesn't just talk about, it's very intelligently designed, isn't it? To think about what a complex maker this must have been. Yeah. But, have you thought about it? It dies and rises and brings life. So with scriptural spectacles on, it's very Jesus-y. It's very, so would you go along with, there's the old chorus, Jesus is Lord, creation's voice proclaims it. Sometimes we step back from that because we don't want to say that you don't need the scriptures and you don't need Christian revelation in order to come to faith, whereas you absolutely do. But how do you react to my claim that actually I think the world is proclaiming a much more Jesus-y, gospel-shaped kind of thing, even though we suppress that?
Well, I think a seed is a very good example, and the butterfly thing. You see, I suppose what we're in a realm, slightly odd, hypothetical realm here, aren't we? Because what I think, if I was to pass your question into, cash it out, I feel like it could be asking something like, were the Bible not to have told me that Jesus died and rose again, would I know that he had from the existence of seeds or butterflies? To which I think the answer is no, I wouldn't. But if the question is, given that God has revealed he has done this, can I now see the fingerprints of that kind of God and that sort of creative work? And that sort of, not just that, actually that sort of principle at work in the world that he has made, whereby with a seed, of course, it's not, sorry, this is now getting into a very long clause. Yes, I think I can, is where I was going to finish that clause. But I think the seed is a good example, because the seed is not only saying this thing dies and then rises again, because 1 Corinthians 15, it's saying this thing dies and rises again with so much more glory and majesty that you would never have possibly inferred the existence of the tree from the existence of the acorn. And so it will be with the resurrection of the dead. So I don't think I could therefore, I don't think, to imagine a world in which there had been no revelation at all. I don't think anybody's going to plant an acorn and think, oh, the dead must be. But I think as soon as you know that it's there, you then go back and say, wow, a long, long time, depending on how you read your, primeval biblical literature, but a long, long time before human beings were there and before there was any resurrection from the dead, God had put into creation other creatures which were designed by the very way that they reproduce to demonstrate that death and then rising to something far more glorious that you would never have been able to guess the splendor of from the husk of seed, shell, acorn, or whatever it was going to preach that message to you, even if you never had ears to hear it. And so I think that's the way I would try and present it. I think given the hypothetical, which I know you didn't quite express it like that, but I think I would answer the hypothetical no. Were there no revelation, I don't think I'd get there. I just think the mind is fallen. I think I'm not going with the sort of high medieval scholastic, yes, you can work everything out. And even then, most of them weren't saying that either. But I think knowing what revelation is and knowing what God has done, you then look and think, oh my goodness, this is even like right now outside my window, I can see there's sort of a whole lot of mineral. I'm not even sure what quality it is. It's probably gravel being poured into a truck. But it just made me think of things like the compression of coal and the sort of thick black stuff. And again, the idea of like compression and pressure over time, turning something that's pretty gritty into something that ultimately could become a diamond. And that sort of, again, that kind of principle, you think, yeah, that's embedded in the Christian response to suffering, even though no one ever makes that point in Scripture.
Yes.
Using that image. And so I think, given revelation, there's a huge amount of work that nature or creation can do. I just think probably you can't have just the one and get there without the help of revelation.
Yes. And therefore Calvin's analogy of the glasses is it's incredibly blurry to the point where we're blind to it. And yet, with the glasses on, you start to see things that were there, but you weren't seeing them.
Yes.
Is that fair? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think but that's not a fault of the thing. That's the fault of the fallen mind, who without God's awakening wouldn't be able to see it.
Yes.
I know you do wonder if there's, to some degree, it's like, are you still so dull that you can't see that this is what penguins or coal or butterflies or acorns or whatever mean? Jesus doesn't say that, so I don't want to put words in his mouth. But that's the gist of what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes. You've got to do the penguins thing for us. Like, what are penguins revealing to us?
Oh, so I just think in fact, there is a penguin. One of my books has a penguin on the front cover, because it was the central image we used, which is that it's the emperor penguin in particular. And I think there is something completely Laurel and Hardy-ish about the way that the way they move, and it's very comic. They're very funny-looking animals in lots of ways, but the way that an emperor penguin packs together in an Antarctic winter, the sun dips below the horizon, and the penguin has no idea when it's going to come back. He knows it will. The mothers all go off because they're exhausted from the purpose of giving birth to the egg, and off they go to the sea. And the fathers have to stay for months in the most hostile conditions that planet Earth has to offer. And in that time, they don't know when the lie is going to break. They know it will, because it always does. But they pack together, they keep each other warm, they sustain and strengthen one another. They look after the new life that they are carrying. But they are waiting for the light to break, and it's an external power that they can only anticipate. And while they're there, I like to think that they're singing Matt Redman. I can see a light that is coming for the heart that holds on. There will be an end to these troubles. But until that day comes, still I will pack together and look after this new life and praise you. And I've found penguins on multiple occasions, like a powerful reminder. Is Paul in Romans 8 saying this is what we are doing. We are groaning, waiting for a light beyond us to dawn, knowing that it will, but not knowing when. And we have to anticipate with that kind of fervent hope and expectation, but also with the patience that comes from not being in control of timing. And I think penguins illustrate that to me beautifully, as of course many hibernating animals do. But because penguins effectively, they're almost hibernating, but they're wide awake, and they're having to pack together in a freezing blizzard at -70. I think, man, you guys are the real deal, and I want to learn from you about how to withstand suffering.
Yeah, and that really preaches. That really, I'm there. As you tell that story, I'm there. And certainly the early years of parenting, and if there are additional needs, thrown in as your book, the Life We Never Expected, is that what it's called?
Yeah, The Life We Never Expected, yeah.
The Life We Never Expected. As you tell that story, yes, that penguin illustration immediately immerses us in a whole world of meaning. in a way that if you just told me, there are 5 things you need to do when
yeah.
adversity strikes. Um,
Yeah.
So how does that understanding of telling the story and making the analogy, how does that inform your preaching? Because that preaches beautifully to our hearts.
I think I probably try not to preach without it, ever. Now, I'm not saying I always do. I'm not saying that if you listen to every message, you'd never find a message in which I hadn't used a thing or an illustration. But I learned to preach in kids club. That's the thing. So I actually dedicated this book to 2 pastor friends of mine who you know as well, Annie and Janet. And I was taught particularly by Janet how to preach in kids club. Like, you're going to preach to 7, 8, 9-year-old children, and you have to write what we'd call the curriculum, I suppose, for those kids. And every week you'd have a Bible verse, and then you'd have 3 what we called object lessons. Here's a thing, and so here's why the Bible is like a phone, and here's why the Bible is like a book. This story is like a book, and here's why it's like a cup. And you didn't have a choice. That was the format. So I had to think of 3 object lessons every week to illustrate the Bible story, and then we tell a life story and then pray. And I think it got me into a really good habit, because I don't think it's only 8-year-olds that need visual things to draw us into a biblical story. I think Jesus obviously uses a disproportionately large number of object lessons given biblical teaching as a whole. It's not just consider the lilies and consider the flowers. It's, hey, what about a man who has a sheep and a coin and a son and all these, a dinner and a cup of wine, and it's just absolutely cascading out of it. And I just think there is an important principle there and at one level, it's simply that of being a good communicator, which is that if I can show you something, I will engage another of your senses in the experience of listening to me preach, which will help snap you back into attention. Because I preach for half an hour, and I know that no one listens to the whole half an hour without stopping. So my job is not to I can't retain anyone's attention for 30 minutes. No one's been listening to this conversation without tuning out a bit. But what I can do is to try and draw you back into it. And one of the ways I can do that is with objects. So that's a sort of almost homiletic communication component to it. But I think the other component to it is the theological one we're making, which is that if you do that, you're venerating appropriately the createdness or the givenness of the world. And you're saying, I'm trying to teach you how to connect things that exist with God, so that you don't end up becoming a Gnostic, or you don't end up becoming. So partly I think when I started, it was an attention retaining device, and as I've got older, it's become more of it's not just a useful communication tool. It's also trying to embody and express something about the relationship between matter and spirit that I think will stand people in good stead, and provide them, as I hope this book does, with touch points in ordinary life to be able to. So now my chapter on honey, for instance, or my chapter on pigs, where I talk about cooking bacon, I'd like to think that people who've read it next time, and not just next time, maybe many years later, they might still think, frying bacon, wow, what does that tell us about God? Honey, why? Because I think it's almost providing us with an excuse to go back and worship to God in ordinary life.
Yes. People will have to pick up the book to get there. How do pigs preach to us the welcome of God? It's a brilliant chapter. Yeah, the hook being, you couldn't think of anything more smelly before it dies, and you couldn't think of anything that smells better after it dies.
Yeah.
Think of the journey of the pig. Yeah, we've put out on Twitter asking for questions for you, Andrew, and Peter Byram's asked this question, which is kind of on the topic of what we've been just discussing. If Jesus focused so much on how to learn about God through everyday things, then how do you explain why theology has become so abstract? Why do we require pastors to spend years geeking out on nigh incomprehensible jargon prior to taking up their roles as leaders of a flock? So we know what Peter Byram thinks. What do you
Why don't you tell us what you really think, Peter Byram? And I'm a slight cheat here, because in our kind of family of churches, we don't. And if anything, I think we should do more theological education than we do, rather than less. In fact, I definitely think that rather than less. So I may not be the best person to explain why the many years of jargon. I think some of that's good and some of it's bad. I think the bit of it that's bad is that I think sometimes bad communicators hide behind jargon, and that I think it takes a really skillful communicator to be able to communicate something that an 8-year-old understands. And I actually think you need to know more about something rather than less to make it simple. And I imagine you'd agree, because, although I'm not giving you an opportunity to say that you wouldn't, but if you have 2 IT guys in your company, the one who's been there for many years and knows exactly what they're doing will tell you what you need to do to fix your machine in a way that makes complete sense. They go, oh, don't worry about it, it's just this, and then you just need to put that in there. And the person who doesn't quite get it will hide behind a whole load of smoke and mirrors to try and make it sound like they know what they're doing. And I think the same's true of preachers, and not in a good way. So I think there's a bad bit there, not just preachers actually, but probably communicators in seminary. But I think the good bit of it is that we sometimes need, because the correspondence between the thing and the divine reality to which it refers is not univocal. I mean, this is basically how you talk about God. This is back to Thomas Aquinas, really. And it's how do you talk about God? And when you say God is like the sun, to take the example you used earlier, in what way is he like the sun? As in, he's not physical. He's personal in the sense that the sun is not. There's many things about God that are true that are not true of the Son, and many things that are true of God and true of the Son, but in analogous ways rather than in direct one-to-one representation. So for me to do the work, and the Son's a pretty good example here, for me to do the work of explaining in what sense God is and is not like the Son. So for the Lord God as a sun and shield, what do I mean by that? Requires me to do a lot more than simply use the picture. So it works fine for my 4-year-old boy. But if I'm going to come into fullness of understanding of who God is, and I'm going to know I am that I am, I have to do some work on what kind of language might that mean. So self-existence is something that is only true of God. The Son is made and created. But nevertheless, the Son in a way shows me something of what it is to be self-existent more than anything else in creation, because it generates its own light, heat, energy, and it is, for us, the source of all that. So although it's not uncreated, it's kind of closer in my understanding to what an uncreated thing might be like in certain ways than a pigeon or a piece of coal or whatever it might be. And that work, I think, is where dogmaticians and theologians come in. And some of them are absolute masters at it and write really, really well. And I think Martin Luther would be a great example. I think Augustine would be a great... People who just write... And Calvin, you mentioned Herman Bavinck, people who can take hold of things and do that work really well. But not everyone's able to do it. And so somewhere things get lost in translation. And at worst, the people who work in the seminary forget how to talk to ordinary people because that may very rarely actually be part of their daily experience. And you end up with a professionalization of seminary teaching, which can gradually make it more and more obscure from the everyday concerns of most people in the church. I find a lot of seminary professors do avoid that and are much more human and much more better at doing it than one might think. But I definitely have seen it, and it worries me. So I think you want people who are both academics and serving their kids' work, which a lot of them do, and I think that's a really good way of trying to hold the two together.
Yes. And where do you think it's come from that so much of theology and even so much of preaching tends to be happier with the propositional and less happy with the narrative? We would have, the way many people preach and the way some theology books are laid out, we imagine that Jesus should have said, let me tell you 6 truths about forgiveness, rather than let me tell you the story of an unmerciful servant. Why have we privileged propositions over narrative, and is there anything we can do to redress that?
I'm still working out exactly how to respond to this particular criticism, but it's a line that really helped me think this through, which I use quite a lot now. I'm now pastor in a black majority church, and I don't think this is true in all kinds of churches, actually. I think it is much more true in a particular tranche that you and I are both part of reformed-ish white evangelicalism. But I don't think it's true globally. It's not true in Middle Eastern churches I've preached in, and India is not where I haven't traveled that much, but... And it was a very interesting line from Anthony Bradley, who's a very thought-provoking guy online. And he said, what happens is that the white church come to Jesus through Paul and the black church come to Jesus through Moses. And that different starting point ends up leading to a lot of the differences between white and black evangelical theology. Or I can't remember if we used the word evangelical, but that's the gist. We believe the Bible's the word of God, but we end up doing theology slightly differently. And one of the reasons is that one comes through a narrative of liberation, the other comes through a series of letters written to instruct churches. And I think that a large part of it is probably we are post-Reformation Protestants, and as a result, we, and by we I mean you and I and many of the people listening to this, but not all believers everywhere by any means, come to the Gospels having found the categories of grace and works that just stick so memorably with our experiences. That's exactly what it's like. I know when I hear Paul, I feel like I'm having the whole world explained to me. It's so rich, and yet that's not Yeah, and of course, it's still true, even if you're from another tradition. But that you might find many people in another tradition say, again, in the Middle East, I'm always told, if you can do this from Genesis, do try and do that. And in the Black Church, if you can do this from Exodus to some degree, try and do that. And I'm finding that it's almost like, and Revelation is another book where you go, wow, that is not because we're worried about the weirdness and what people do with the weirdness. But there would be different branches of the global church where the question you just asked would almost be, I have to ask of a different book. And you've got people who say, no, a storytelling preaching comes very naturally. I actually find it quite difficult to preach in the propositional 3-point way. Now, that would be a sociological, historical guess. And by the way, that doesn't mean that I don't preach I usually still preach now with 3 points. I find 3 is a good number. And Jesus does too, actually. He just doesn't do it with 3 abstract truths all the time. There was a sheep and a coin and a son, or whatever. There was a priest, a Levite, and a Samaritan. But so I think it can still be good to do it in a structured fashion. But I think that might be the cultural backdrop we're coming from, maybe a significant reason why we tend to do it in our kind of churches in quite a propositional, abstract, non-narrative way. And I think we've got to learn, and we've got to preach in diverse contexts to enhance our capacity to do it, and perhaps travel a bit and hear people from other traditions doing it better than we do.
Excellent. Yeah. Very helpful answer. Somebody else on Twitter has asked this question. If it's not too late, how do we respond to David Attenborough and others who look at creation and they don't just see penguins who are, clinging on through the darkness? They see things like David Attenborough would be asked, when you look at creation, does it help you believe in God? He said, I think of a little child in East Africa with a worm burrowing through his eyeball. The worm cannot live in any other way except by burrowing through eyeballs. So you're just picking and choosing, Andrew. You like the penguins, but the parasites. What's going on with that aspect of nature, and how do we integrate that?
So I wrote the book before COVID started, but I had a chapter in it on viruses, and it's the only one I had to rewrite. And even then, I didn't rewrite it in terms of its content. I rewrote it because I just wanted to it would have been weird to write a chapter on viruses now without talking about COVID. But actually, the gist of the argument was that virus, before and after COVID started, was that viruses express the problem of evil better than anything else I know. And to be honest, the worm that you just mentioned is very similar. But I think viruses almost even more so because there are billions of them on Earth right now, not just the one we all know about, but they cause untold suffering to billions of people. And they bring death, and obviously some of them are needed and some of them do have good side effects as well, but there's a whole bunch of them that you think this world would be better off without. And not only, it's not like something where I have as a human being caused this to be, as far as I'm aware. I mean, mutations in viruses are not caused directly by human action, perhaps indirectly, but and therefore I have to consider all things are created by him and sustained by him, invisible as well as visible, which means that God is deliberately sustaining and in fact creating new viruses as we speak all around the world and sustaining them by the word of his power, and they're causing harm to people. And I say in the book, like the worm, I think the worm in some ways, that's always the one that gets brought up, but I tend to find it's almost a slight red herring because it's saying if you can imagine a child suffering with it, then that makes it worse. I don't think it does, actually. I think the problem's true of everything that is set up in a world with death that is going to bring death or pain to somebody else. And it's just a particularly egregious example, emotive one. And so what I do with the book really is to then put in that chapter on viruses, is to put all of the different answers we might give to that question on trial and say in the end, none of them work, none of them wash. The only answer we can have at this point, why does God create and sustain that worm or that virus or whatever, is I don't know. I think in the end, I can't, and that's my answer to the problem of suffering as well. I think is I have to stand. It's very easy to remember, very quick to say, but it gets books thrown across the room when you write them down. But I think in the end, that is where I have to go, that I do not have an all-encompassing answer for the existence of HIV or the worm that's being spoken of or COVID. I do not know. I know that some kinds of suffering I can explain in this way. That was by human choice. That is just a simple natural outgrowth of physical laws. If you jump off the top of a building and hurt yourself, that's because physical laws have to exist what they are. Pain is needed in a world where there's death to protect you. So I can do some sort of apologetic of some sort of suffering. But then I think God is sustaining and creating viruses. Why is he doing this? What possible reason could there be? And I have to stand back and say, I do not know. And funnily enough, just today I finished a book by Tish Harrison Warren called Prayer in the Night. And the very last page of that, she makes this point. She said, actually, what Christianity does not, I forget the exact wording, but it basically said Christianity doesn't solve that problem. It simply eventually redeems you out of it. It transforms the world. It doesn't ever say, here's the reason that I could give David Attenborough why that worm doesn't mean God is bad or God doesn't exist. Christianity just doesn't do that. I have to look at that worm with the same degree of bafflement as David Attenborough does. The only thing I can say to him at this point is probably, your innate sense that is an evil is a Christian sense, not an atheist materialist sense. It doesn't actually make any sense within an entirely atheist worldview. But that wouldn't convince him, and I wouldn't expect it to. I think ultimately I'm staring at it with the same bafflement as he is, saying, why did God create that then? And I think I have to say at this point, I do not know. I just know that one day even that suffering is going to be swallowed up in victory and life. And maybe one day I'll understand. But for now, I hang on like the penguin in the dark and go, yeah, this doesn't make sense to me either. And I'm going to have to keep going and trust that God who raised Jesus from the dead has got some good reason of his own.
Right. Do you think in the last year we've kind of backed off on a theology of plagues a little bit? In that, I think that there have been a number of books sort of written about what is God up to with COVID, and I noticed that a lot of them kind of treat COVID as an abstract example of suffering, as opposed to, well, there is a biblical category called plagues and pestilence, and Exodus and Amos and Revelation have quite a bit to say about it. I just wonder whether people have backed off slightly on the.
Yeah. So what I have. I say backed off. I'm not sure I was ever that. I don't think I was ever. So I remember when Pat Robertson said that the thing in Haiti had been caused by the fact that they were into voodoo. And I think before that had probably said that the reason why New Orleans got hit by Katrina was because they were a particularly debauched city and Mardi Gras.
And on 9/11, yeah.
Right. So, and I think that's what people are trying. And so in that sense, I think I was a young adult when those things started happening, and probably have always backed off, or rather, I don't think I ever backed forward or forwarded off, or whatever the word would be. But I think when I've spoken about this in my church, as we did this early last year, and I took Jesus from at the Tower of Siloam and in Luke 13, and I said, I think this is a good way of. This is not to say that there is no divine purpose in what is happening here. This is to say that I am at this point not qualified to know what that is, and I don't want to assume that I do.
Right.
And I think there is actually quite a big difference. It's almost full circle back to the very start of this conversation, isn't there? There's a difference between knowing that something is and knowing that you know that something is. And so I think I do believe that I think God is doing something. And in fact, I could make all sorts of guesses as to some of the ways in which this might end up working to the greater glory of Christ and to the redemption of the world. And also I could see those things might be true. But I'm not confident enough in my ability to read that kind of symbolism at this sort of proximity when it's so close to me. And I think I read enough history to know that a lot of the people who tried to say this is what God is doing through the Black Death, to take a much, much more egregious example of a massive plague, nowadays you and I would read almost every one of those accounts and say, yeah, no, guys, that's just completely wrong. And maybe they were right and we are wrong, but it certainly doesn't look like it from the distance of 700 years. So I think it's probably that's where the agnosticism is coming from, rather than the belief that there is no purpose to it. It's simply saying, I don't think I quite know what that is, or even how I'd know I was right. I don't know. Do you agree? Or do you preach pestilence a bit more these days?
A little bit in terms of, there is a judging thing going on. But just being very aware, as you say, that it's not that God is singling out a certain subsection of the population for this particular crime, but there is a sense, I guess, of an intensification of the natural course of life, in which God is angry every day, and the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven, and we are dying, and that is a judgment on us, and the intensification of that judgment and the bringing us up short is certainly intended to turn us to the Lord, and so at that level,
Yeah,
I
and
can't
I think,
say
but of
those
course,
things.
that I think you can say of death generally, and that is then the application. I think that's then what I probably went on to do in the message I was referring to go from there to this is, unless you repent, you too will perish, which of course exactly what Christ does. So I think we've got that.
Mm.
But it's more like again, our circles are somewhat different here. I know I said we're both from reformed-ish, but I've got a lot more people inclined to read Signs of the Timesy, future, sort of the charismatic Pentecostal traditions, because it's got a lot more of that in it. And so I'm probably a bit more cautious about feeding that in a context like this. And in fairness, that's come up very little in my church. But I know that there's obviously quarters of the internet where it's still quite a lot of speculation about it. And so that's my reason anyway.
Brilliant. Final question, Andrew. What do you hope for the book?
Well, it's funny. I was praying that this morning. Obviously, you always write a book and you hope a lot of people will read it. But I think what I really hope is that, and I was trying to get myself to want, where you want something and you want to want something else. I think partly what I want is I'd love like lots and lots of people to read this. And I thought, no, but what I want is whether or not lots of people read it, even if very, very few people read it, but the people who do would find themselves with an expanded delight in God, which I hope is why I write all the things I write. But I definitely, with this one, I want. There's a guy who, when I wrote my first book in 2007, it was a bit in format to this, short chapters on God. And he's up in Scotland, and he said to me, what I do is I turn on the bath in the morning, I sit there, I read a chapter of your book, and by the time I finish the chapter, I've basically it's brought worship into my heart, and I finish the chapter, and then the bath is ready for me to sit in and get on with my day. And I thought, I think I want the book to do that. I think I want somebody to be able to spend 5-8 minutes of their day drawing nourishment from God and finding their heart cause to move to praise and delight in Him more. And then to be able to put it down and then pick up another chapter the next day. That's what I hope will happen with this book, no matter how many people read it.
Well, it certainly helped me, and I hope it wakes up many Christians to the fact that we live in a temple, not in the factory floor, and to pay attention to God revealing Himself in all things. And I think it gave me a really rich understanding of the Scriptures, but even more of the world that we live in. That in Him we live and move and have our being. And gosh, what a wonderful thing for a book to have done. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, thank you. That's really encouraging to know.
Brilliant. Andrew Wilson, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.